She introduced me as her assistant, not her husband, not her partner, not even by my name, her assistant. I was standing right there holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, wearing the blazer she picked out for me that morning. And she looked at her VP of marketing, smiled that polished smile I used to think was just for me, and said, "Oh, this is Miles. He helps me with logistics." Helps her with logistics. 17 years. 2 kids. A mortgage we'd refinanced twice because her career investments kept bleeding us dry. And standing in the lobby of the Hargrove Group's annual client dinner, I was logistics. I smiled. I shook the VP's hand. I said it was nice to meet him. And I did not say another word for the rest of that evening. Because I already knew everything I needed to know. I'd known for 11 weeks. I just hadn't decided yet what to do with it. Let me back up. Because if I start with that lobby moment, you'll think this is just a story about a dinner party. It isn't. It's about the slow erosion of something. The way a person can look at their own life and not recognize it anymore. Not because of one dramatic betrayal, but because of 1,000 small ones, stacked so carefully you don't notice the weight until one day you just can't stand up straight. My wife, I'll call her my wife because that's what she was legally for all of this, was a brand strategist. Good one, actually. She built her consultancy from nothing, which I genuinely admired. When we met, I was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm. She was freelancing out of a 1-bedroom apartment, and we were both eating too much takeout and working too many hours, and somehow we fit together in a way that made sense. We got married when I was 31. She was 29. We had our son 2 years later, our daughter the year after that. For a long time, things were good. Not perfect, nothing is, but real. Solid. The kind of marriage that has weight to it. Then her business started growing. Fast. I don't resent her success. I want to be clear about that. I'm proud of what she built. But somewhere in the building of it, I became part of the infrastructure. The guy who handled school pickups and contractor calls and insurance renewals. The guy who made sure the house didn't fall apart while she was flying to Chicago and Austin and Portland to charm new clients. I stopped being her partner. I became her system. And systems don't get thanked. They just get expected to run. The first real sign, the one I pushed down and ignored, came about 2 years before the dinner party. She hired a creative director for her consultancy. His name was Joel, late 30s, the kind of guy who wore expensive sneakers to client meetings and talked about narrative architecture like it meant something. He was talented, I'll give him that. But he was also the kind of man who looked at married women the way a person looks at a parking spot they think they can squeeze into. I met him twice at her office events. Both times he shook my hand with that particular firmness that's not about greeting. It's about establishing. And both times my wife laughed a little too quickly at whatever he said before I could respond. I noticed. I filed it away. I told myself I was being insecure. The late nights started gradually. Then they weren't gradual. Her phone developed a new habit of facing screen down on the kitchen counter. She started going to the gym at 6 a.m., which she'd never done in 17 years of marriage. She bought new perfume without mentioning it. Small things. The kind that individually mean nothing. But I am a project manager by trade. My entire professional existence is built around noticing patterns, tracking variables, understanding when something is off schedule. Something was off schedule. The morning I found out for certain, I wasn't even looking. It was a Tuesday in October. She'd left her laptop open on the kitchen table. She almost never did that. And I walked by to grab my coffee and I saw his name in her inbox subject line. The preview text was 4 words. I won't repeat them. I stood in my kitchen for probably 3 minutes. Just stood there. My coffee got cold. I could hear my daughter upstairs getting ready for school, singing something to herself, completely unaware that the floor of her family's life had just shifted 2 inches to the left. I closed the laptop. I poured my coffee down the drain. I drove my daughter to school, listened to her talk about a project on ecosystems, asked the right questions, said the right things. Then I sat in a parking lot for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I want to say I did because crying seems like the appropriate response. But what I actually felt was something quieter and colder. The feeling of a thing you suspected being confirmed. The particular stillness that comes when you stop hoping you're wrong. I drove to work. I did my job. I came home. And I didn't say a word. Here's what most people do when they find out. They confront. They explode. They demand answers, throw accusations, blow up the house immediately. I understand that impulse. I felt it too. A version of it anyway. But I kept thinking about my kids. I kept thinking about my kids. I kept thinking about the mortgage. I kept thinking about the fact that rage is loud and loud is sloppy, and sloppy people make mistakes that cost them everything. I didn't want to cost myself everything. I'd already lost enough. So I waited. And while I waited, I paid attention. Over the next 11 weeks, I learned things I never would have learned if I'd confronted her that Tuesday morning. I learned that Joel wasn't just a workplace affair. He was her business partner in something she'd never mentioned to me. A side project, a consulting offshoot she'd been quietly building using our joint accounts as a funding buffer. Small withdrawals, never large enough to trip any alert, but consistent, methodical. I learned that 3 of her major client contracts that were technically joint assets in our marriage, had been quietly moved under a new LLC she'd formed 6 months earlier. In her name only. I learned that she'd consulted a divorce attorney in September, a month before I found the email. She was already planning her exit. She was just waiting until the finances were arranged the way she wanted them. I am a project manager. I understand timelines. She had a timelines, and I wasn't on it. So I built my own. I called my brother first. He's an attorney, not family law, but he knew who to call. Within a week, I had a consultation with a woman named Diane who specialized in exactly this kind of case, high asset, premeditated, one spouse strategically repositioning finances before filing. Diane looked at what I gathered and said, very calmly, "You did good work." That was the first time in months I felt like myself. Over the next 6 weeks, Diane and her team documented everything. The LLC, the account movements, the contracts, the timeline of the secret entity formation relative to when she'd first accessed that divorce attorney. Meanwhile, I went to every school event. I made dinner 4 nights a week. I attended her company's annual client dinner, the one where she introduced me as logistics, and I smiled and held those glasses of sparkling water and shook hands with her VP and said it was nice to meet him, because I needed her to believe nothing had changed. And she did. That is perhaps the saddest part of all of this, that I could have been replaced so completely in her mind, reduced to a function she managed rather than a person she knew, that she genuinely couldn't read me anymore. 17 years, and she had no idea. There's a moment I keep coming back to, about 3 weeks before everything came out. It was a Sunday morning. The kids were at my parents' place. We were alone in the house for the first time in what felt like months, and she came downstairs in the old university sweatshirt she's had since we met, and for a second, just a second, she looked exactly like the person I married. She made coffee. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. She asked how my week was. And I thought, does she know? Somewhere underneath all of this, what she's doing. Does some part of her understand what she's taking apart? I don't know the answer. I'd stopped trying to figure it out. What I said was, "Good week. You?" She told me about a client call, a branding problem she was solving. She was animated and smart, and I listened and asked questions, and it was almost like a regular Sunday. Almost. The papers were filed on a Wednesday. Diane had advised me on timing. File before any indication she was close to moving, and make sure the asset documentation was already in the court's hands before she had a chance to respond. So we did it right. The process server reached her at her office. I know because she called me 20 minutes later, and I let it go to voicemail. Then she called 4 more times in the next hour. I let those go too. The voicemails were a progression. The first was confusion. The second was anger. The third was something that might have been the beginning of an explanation. The fourth was silence for about 8 seconds. Then the call ended. I sat in my car in the parking garage outside my office building, and I listened to all of them, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, not relief, not vindication. Just tired. Deeply, thoroughly tired. The financial case took 7 months. It was not pleasant. Her attorney was aggressive, and she was not above rewriting history. Suddenly, I had been controlling. Suddenly, I had been the one holding her back. Suddenly, our 17 years had a completely different texture in her telling than they had in mine. I had expected this. Diane had prepared me for this. What I hadn't expected was the moment in mediation when she looked across the table at me and said, "I don't understand why you're doing this." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the lobby. I thought about helps me with logistics. I thought about the LLC formed in secret. I thought about the attorney she'd seen before I even knew what was happening. I said, "I know." 2 words. That was all. Her attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. My wife looked down at the table. I don't know what she was thinking. I don't need to. The settlement was fair. Diane is excellent at her job. The joint assets were properly divided. The hidden LLC was accounted for in the final numbers, and the custody arrangement that came out of it all puts my kids at my place 4 nights a week, which was the only number that actually mattered to me through all of this. My son is 12 now. My daughter is 10. They are resilient in the way children are when the adults around them try hard not to make their pain the kids' problem. They have 2 homes. They know both parents love them. That is enough. It has to be enough. Joel, for what it's worth, didn't survive the professional fallout. When the LLC situation came to light in the proceedings, and it had to, because it was relevant to the asset documentation, 2 of her major clients found out that their contracts had been reassigned to an entity they hadn't agreed to. One of them had a morality clause in their original agreement with her consultancy. I did not engineer that outcome. I want to be clear about that. I gave Diane documents. What happened after was the natural consequence of what those documents showed. Her consultancy still exists. It's smaller now. She still works with Joel as far as I know. I genuinely hope she finds what she was looking for. I mean that. Carrying bitterness about her would require energy I no longer have and no longer want to spend. What I think about more than anything is the specific moment in that lobby, holding those glasses of sparkling water. Because here's the thing, and I've had a lot of time to sit with this, she wasn't just careless in that moment. She made a choice, a deliberate choice about who I was allowed to be in public, in her world, in the story she was telling about her own life. And that choice told me everything about where I had ended up in her estimation. You can love someone and still erase them. Slowly, quietly, without ever meaning to be cruel, and they can let it happen. Slowly and quietly because they love you back. And love makes you patient in ways that eventually stop looking like patience and start looking like disappearance. I disappeared, a little at a time, for years. The lobby was just the moment I noticed. I'm in a different apartment now, smaller than the house which I expected to mind more than I do. There's a room for my son with a poster of his favorite team above the bed, and a room for my daughter with the string light she picked herself along the window. On the nights they're here, the apartment is loud and full and exactly the right size. On the nights they're not, I've learned how to be alone in a way I don't think I ever knew how to be. I cook things I actually want to eat. I watch whatever I want. I take long walks in the evenings and think about very little, which is its own kind of luxury. A few months ago, a woman at my daughter's school asked me if I wanted to get coffee sometime. I said I'd think about it. That's the most honest answer I could give. I'm not in a hurry. I spent 17 years being someone's system, and I'd like to spend some time just being a person again before I become anything else to anyone. Someone asked me recently if I had any regrets about the marriage, about how it ended. I thought about it seriously before I answered. I don't regret the marriage. I got 2 kids out of it who are the best thing I've ever done. I don't regret the years before the erosion started because those years were real. What I regret is the patience that crossed over into passivity. The moments I saw the small signs and filed them away instead of asking about them. The Sunday mornings I answered fine when I should have said something truer. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my life looking backwards at a marriage that made its choice about me before I made mine. I know what I'm worth. I know what I have to offer. I know how to show up for the people who matter. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. The last text message my wife ever sent me, my ex-wife now, I keep forgetting to make the correction, came 6 weeks after the settlement finalized. It was 3 sentences. She said she hoped I was doing well. She said she was sorry it went the way it did. She said the kids seemed happy. I read it twice. I thought about responding. I put my phone back in my pocket. Later that evening, my son beat me at chess for the first time in his life. He was so proud he couldn't stop grinning. My daughter declared herself the official scorekeeper and gave him a score of 1,000,000 and docked me 40 points for losing. I looked at the 2 of them across the table and I thought, this is what I was protecting. This is what all of it was for. I went to bed that night and I slept 8 hours straight. First time in longer than I can remember. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the plain ordinary kind. The kind where you trace a line backward from where you ended up and you can see Clearly, every decision that brought you there, every choice that seemed small at the time. My wife made a lot of small choices, so did I. Her choices were about what she wanted and how far she was willing to go to get it. Quietly, methodically, without ever having the courage to be honest about it. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the betrayal itself, but the cowardice underneath it. She didn't leave. She just started building a door out while still living in the house, still using the house, still letting me be the person who kept the house standing. And my choices, mine were about patience that I mistook for virtue. I told myself I was being steady, mature, that I wasn't the kind of man who overreacted. What I was actually doing was ignoring things I didn't want to be true, because being wrong would have required me to act, and acting would have been hard. Here's what I know now. Intelligence without honesty is just a sharper way to fool yourself. I'm a detail-oriented person. I notice things, but I spent years noticing and then filing it away, and that's not intelligence in service of your life. That's intelligence in service of your comfort. Real clarity requires you to look at what you see and actually reckon with it, even when the reckoning costs you something. The ethics of what she did are obvious, and I don't need to dwell on them. But the ethics of what I allowed, the slow erasure, the years of answering fine when I wasn't fine, the decision not to ask the harder questions, those are mine to own. Nobody made me disappear. I participated in my own disappearance, one quiet morning at a time. That's not self-blame, that's just the truth, and I'd rather have the truth than a clean story where I'm only the victim. What pulled me back was something simple. I decided to be competent on my own behalf. I took the same skills I used every day at work. Attention, documentation, patience, strategy, and I applied them to my own life for the first time in years. That's it. No dramatic transformation. Just a man deciding that what happened to him mattered enough to handle carefully. The outcome wasn't perfect. It was fair, which is different. My kids are okay. That's the only metric that actually kept me up at night. And by that metric, I did all right. If I could tell anyone anything from the other side of this, and I mean anyone, not just people in bad marriages, just people in general, it would be this. The life you accept is the life you're choosing. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just incrementally, one, it's fine, at a time. At some point, fine becomes the floor and you forget there was ever anything higher. Miles knew there was something higher. He just needed to remember it was still available to him. It was. It is. That's worth protecting.